about to ask if H4EU M0R9N, etc., etc. was Josh, but now I see your face and I know it is. I got a message from Jordan that he was a little under the weather and he'll not be joining today. We'll give it a minute or two for others to join. Hey, Lubomir, gonna give it a moment still just for anybody else who might join. Well, we may as well get started. Can the two of you hear me? I'm not hearing any audio. Okay, Lubomir says yes in the chat. All right, so the recording is automatically going. This is the February 18th meeting of the working group LTS for Kubernetes. The meeting is recorded. We follow the Kubernetes code of conduct and the video will get uploaded to YouTube after we're done here. I have been remiss in setting up the agenda for the day. I guess while I'm doing that briefly, are there things that either of you are hoping to talk about today? Okay, in that case, Luminar says in the chat doesn't have anything. Josh, do you have anything? Maybe Josh doesn't hear us. How about now? I see you looking at your screen, wondering. Must not. I see you typing. Okay, Josh doesn't hear anything. I'll give you a second and try to ramble about nothing in particular for a moment to see if you can hear our audio.
Okay, better.
Okay, I hear you too. All right, cool. Well, with that out of the way. So I was just starting to paste a few things in the agenda, which I had not done previously. So there's kept stuff to talk about. Contrib Summit and survey, I believe, would be the things for the week. Anything that you want to talk about, Josh, outside of those three?
Nope.
Okay. So first of all, let me see if I'm going to paste a link. I can't tell if Sked is showing me things on this link for the Contributor Summit or if it's actually public now. I thought like kind of today, tomorrow, it was supposed to be going public, but I forget the specific date. Can either of you see that? Do you get the actual schedule?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I guess I'm not blowing anything. I wasn't sure if this was public yet, but the schedule is up. And we are on the schedule. So 1:30 in the afternoon on Monday, March 30th, during Contributor Summit, we've got a time slot to talk about things, in particular the KEP proposal. So with a little luck, we'll have conversation a little bit more down the lane, I guess. In our prior meeting 2 weeks ago, we talked about starting to drive for the last bit of feedback we're hoping to get and pull where we hadn't gotten it. And one of the suggestions had been to throw it out on the KDEV mailing list. So I did that 2 weeks ago. Didn't get any responses on KDEV, but a couple people put a few comments after that on the KEP. So maybe we can talk about those a little bit right now. Copy pasting the link up into the minutes for that also. Oh, and I did the wrong link. I want the enhancements link. Okay, so it's poll 1497 on the enhancements repo, which is what I should have pasted there. I'll throw that in the Zoom chat if you don't have it up. One of the annoying things about how GitHub does its conversations is that you get sort of a new thread-ish in time order, but within each thread, since they're threads, it's really hard to look and see like what is the most recent comment. So I've been trying to look at this periodically and see like have any of these subpoints of conversation gotten new comments on them, but like scrolling back through months worth of comments is tedious and lossy. So I feel like the main set of additional feedback we got 2 weeks ago, if I'm not missing things, was from Ben Elder. And conversation happened around most of those, but do you feel like there's outstanding things there to be addressed?
Well, I'm trying to. There was stuff not addressed in testing, and I'm looking right now and trying to determine whether or not that got added.
There is another commit. Let me, I think I can just link directly to.
Because particularly the SKU testing is really where we're going to have an increase in testing. Oh no, it's still not. That's still not been resolved.
That's
No.
yeah. That's not in that particular one. Yeah. So we do have a little bit more to add there for
Okay.
sure.
Okay, I can go ahead and take that part on, because I mean, what needs to go in there is just the plan that we need to add. We need to add additional SKU tests, and we need to modify the release tests at least to cover one more version cycle.
So thinking about process and iterating on this, it's currently marked as provisional. I wonder if at what point it makes sense to try to get the PR merged as provisional while we iterate on things towards making it implementable. Because if you go and work on it, would you PR against Nick's branch for him to pull into this PR, or
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I just do the GitHub suggested edit thing.
Oh yeah, that works too. Yeah, I forget that exists. Yep, that makes sense.
It addresses one of the failings of collaborative PRs. Yes, no, because technically I could do a PR against Nick's branch, but then no one would see that until Nick merged it.
Yeah, he'd have to merge it and repush to this PR. Yeah, it's like we kind
Yeah.
of want a feature branch where everybody who's interested in this is collaborating on it, or
Yeah,
the
well, but then
UC
the
stuff.
feature branch needs to be in a canonical repository. I mean, it's it's what I do on some other projects. The drawback to that is that you do need a certain amount of coordination, because if
Yeah.
everyone's sharing the same feature branch, you can actually clobber
Yep.
each other's work. So
Yep. Totally. So I guess the GitHub click on the web UI
yeah,
is probably the most straightforward way to
okay,
just make a little thing like that.
yeah. But am I correct in assessing those are basically the two things we need in the test plan, right? Is
I
we need to
think
talk
so.
about
Yeah.
the additional SKU tests, and we need to talk about extending the release tests to cover the extra version. Which is not so
Yeah.
much extending as
We talk
waiting to
about
delete
not
them until later.
dropping them,
Right.
but yeah, that I
Where
think
where do
what
we
Ben
talk
was
about
calling
that?
out, we in the costs section, and I think that was part of
Okay.
what
Okay.
Ben was calling out. Like we're saying that there's no additional cost, but it is an additional cost by not removing.
Yeah.
Like if we had this in accounting world, double ledger book entry, like maybe it would make more sense. I don't know. We don't have numbers around any of this anyway.
No.
Yeah, I think it's down at the end test plan where he says we're increasing the SKU and expanded test matrix. So yeah, they probably both could be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then I have to put in there as a note that some SIGs may decide to increase their version test coverage as well, which would obviously be an additional cost, but that would be up to them. Like I'm pretty sure SIG cluster lifecycle would, for example, increase the scope of their tests.
Oh, yes, it's going to be fairly simple for us.
Mm-hmm.
The more difficult part is usually updating the docs.
Oh, that's true. There's also the issue. Well, I mean, the docs don't go away. It's just a question of what's flagged as expired.
Do we actively do that in the docs? So right now on the docs website, it's defaulting to 117 version. If I go and click 113, oh yeah, at the top of the page, Kubernetes v1.13 documentation no longer actively maintained. 14 says the same. So then 15, 16, and 7. Oh no, 15 says no longer actively maintained. 16 says that also. So from the docs perspective, only the current one is actively maintained.
So when they're saying no longer actively maintained, they're talking about the documentation, not about the
Yeah,
version.
yep.
So they don't have a flag in the documentation at all about which versions are expired.
I think so.
Okay.
There was a flag that was changed in the release automation that impacted docs, but I don't think it was quite around this.
So the website repository, they do not maintain the old releases of the docs. So once 118 is out, 117 is out of support already. They don't backport changes in the docs.
Right. Yeah. The question was whether or not documentation actually showed anywhere if you were on a version of Kubernetes that was no longer patch supported, and the answer seems to be no.
I'm not
I don't
seeing
think
it.
we have this dynamic
Okay.
logic.
Okay. One less thing for us to fix, something I might want to file as a
Yeah, I think we should
PR
note
against
that.
documentation,
Yeah.
but the so okay.
In terms of updates for the website in general, I think it's appropriate for us to just log an issue at some point, and maybe SIGDocs can take ownership of fixing multiple areas that need fixing there.
The Well, I don't know. Where do we actually publish which versions are supported? That's the question.
I think in the Kubernetes repository, we had a file. In the file, we have what is the current version of development. Let me check.
It's also noted in SIG releases repo. There's a link in the Zoom chat under the patch releases documentation, but that's like that's
Yeah.
not a discoverable place.
Right. I'm thinking about in, wait, how do I get to the documentation?
Tim, do you remember this file that we have in KK, which is the current release under development, which is the previous release and the release before that?
There's the marker files in the cloud, and I thought on test infra, but I don't recall there being one in KK.
I was looking at this file the other day, but I forgot the location. Yeah, so Kubernetes website should definitely need changes with regards to the support SKU.
Basically, as far as I can tell, there's only one document there, and that's the version and version SKU support policy. I don't think that there are any other places within the core documentation that we
Yes,
actually talk about supported versions.
Yes, also the kubeadm has a page, similar page to this one.
Okay. If you want to go ahead, so do we already have a documentation section for the PR somewhere, don't we?
I'm actually realizing that might be a gap.
Okay. So we need to add a documentation section, and those two things need to go under documentation. Because we might as well have a list. So we bothered to look it up. We might as well have a list of all the things we're going to need to update.
So we have, in the design details, we have a section on updating community documentation, like the support policy. That's in the, The template has a few things around documentation, but I wonder if we actually didn't really quite get into that. Like, community contributor guide isn't exactly like, yes, they talk about this, but that's not really the place where it's called out.
Okay, well, so we need to add a documentation section.
Yeah, there's a few things in the design details section. There's the last two subsections there, or the next to the last two. I don't know, maybe they're middle. The way Markdown is making this list hard to view. Within there, there's a number of things that could be binned as a documentation section.
Yeah, well, we've got two documentation things right there.
Yeah.
We just don't have all the documentation things. So put all those in a documentation section.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. The oof. Okay, this is sounding more like I actually am going to make a PR and ask Nick to merge it.
Yeah.
We're going beyond a little bit of. We're going a little bit beyond what should go into suggested edits.
Yeah, I agree. So I started jotting, as I was looking through, as we were talking about that, I started jotting one other thing I saw in the recent GitHub comments, and that is that Tim St. Clair had asked why go about it this way instead of changing the release cadence. So going back a number of months, we decided that between the two, changing the release cadence, making the releases more often or less often, was a harder change to realize than just changing the support statement and testing and documentation, just changing that. So we did a lot of discussion around that. Tim St. Clair had been one of the active voices on making the release cadence faster, like monthly. So I was a little surprised by his comment to make it slower. But I also think like that demonstrates that that's a whole realm of complexity, and to shift that off to the side means that it can be addressed on its own. Conflating the two makes it very difficult to make incremental change. But I don't know. I feel like we've discussed that every which way back and forth.
Yeah, the yeah, and I'll say from experience that there's some unanticipated effects to making the release cycle longer. The main one being that a slightly longer release cycle means more stuff in every release. And it also means more people arguing about whether or not their stuff should get into this particular release. I mean, I don't know that would be a particularly pronounced effect between quarterly and 3 per year, but it would happen. I don't know. It was not. Yeah, it's weird because I feel like Tim was a big part of the reason why we discarded that as a possible course of action, because he wanted releases that were more frequent, not less frequent.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So I don't know. We have all those discussions recorded. We have reasoned why we went about things the way we did. I think it was reasonable, the
Yeah.
reason we did there.
Well, I mean, that's the reason we have a cap and that sort of thing. So I think the answer is, wait, did anybody reply to his comment?
I did. So I replied to the first one, but there are two other ones that kind of start the conversation. Tim is often terse in his writing. The 2, 3 is greater than 4. I'm not 100% sure what he's saying there.
Oh, it's faster. I think he means that it's just faster than 4, maybe.
But
I'm not finding the comment thread.
I'm wondering what was the main argument against 3 releases per year?
Like I said, when we did
velocity, like Josh was saying.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of lengthening or shortening releases, you have a set of fairly common problems. But as I recall, the main reason why we decided not to pursue that route was because, well, we have people in the community who would like to do releases less frequently. We also have people in the community who would like to do releases more frequently. And the more frequently in camp includes Tim, which is why, the suggestion from him, who attended our meetings. So the suggestion from him is a little strange. So I think we actually need a particular comment on that.
Yes, but in his proposal, he was talking about the parallel development branch, I believe.
Yeah, and that was yearly. So that, well, monthly development branches and annual release branches, or I don't know, stable branches. I forget what the nomenclature was he was using there. Dev stable, I think. So there, I mean, he may be arguing both sides of it. Yes, we need to make smaller releases, but from a support perspective, we should make larger releases. Development happens better on small releases. Support happens better on, like, maybe agreeing support happens better on an annual cadence.
Yeah. Looking at all the semantics that we have in Kubernetes around updating, just adding a new release. When it's released, we add it to a bunch of places, multiple occasions, documentation. If we have to do this less often in terms of managing these details, it's going to be easier for us in this particular aspect, at least. But I don't see I don't think it matters that much if we do 3 or 4. I think there was a Golang related argument. There was something else here.
The Golang, I mean, the dependency thing is calendar based, so it doesn't matter how many releases we do. The dependency thing is going to be a problem regardless. Because that is a Golang does not guarantee support, patch support back per year.
Yeah, so Tim is adding this comment now, but I guess this particular group escalated their decision to have 4 releases as the new proposal instead of extending the release cycle, the support cycle. So the comment, I mean, we can discuss it on the PR, but it feels like this is not the place to discuss it. Because we already came up with this idea.
Well, I mean, obviously, a CAP is the place to discuss alternative plans, or at least discussion on the CAP, right? Because if anybody has a proposal for we're going to do X, then somebody can say, hey, Y would fulfill the same goals and it would be easier because X, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The problem is that, we're going to have to bring that back to community discussion and say, hey, we did not pursue that because we, got direct feedback that a lot of people would not be okay with releasing less frequently, releasing.
Does it make sense to bring such fundamental discussions to a mailing list? Because essentially what Tim is asking for here changes the CAP completely.
It's an alternative CAP, I feel like. If as a working group, we collated a set of experiences and opinions together and found this is a common path that provides an improvement. Mm-hmm. There has been a common refrain there, though, of people saying, well, it's such a small improvement, is it really worthwhile? And I do see that in Tim's comment, like 3 versus 4, or 3 months versus 4, 3 releases versus 4 releases, or 4 months versus 3 months. Like, either way, they're both minor increments.
Yeah. So
I'm just with you. I mean, we declared as a non-goal, change the release cadence. And then from there, that's up at the top of the document. Then we say, see alternatives below. And we discuss it there. We have links to the artifacts for other proposals. So I feel like
it's there,
discussed in the document.
Yeah.
Maybe the CAP should include the comments about this argument, like why don't we want 3 releases per year? Because
we don't
think
say that we don't, and in particular, and related to Tim St. Clair's proposal around moving faster, we say this may be compatible and complementary with the change proposed in this CUP. Additional changes in this direction remain a possibility in the future. So we're not saying we don't want it, but unless there's somebody championing that direction, it's and that relative to where we've basically found general consensus and people feeling satisfied enough with this is out of the set of possible changes, this one providing value that doesn't preclude other future value. Like it's, I don't know how we address it really.
A simple question here. Do you guys think that it would have made a lot more sense to have a survey with one question in the survey? And the survey would be like, what do you prefer? 3 releases per year or 4 releases per year with the extended?
I think we could have surveyed that, but I also think like we'd need to survey, we need to do that to multiple audiences or consider the audiences differently. Like if you ask customers, would you prefer to never have to upgrade for the next 7 years? And everything works perfectly for that time without ever upgrading. Like everybody's going to say yes. People don't like to have to change things for no reason. So the longer support you offer, people are going to probably choose for less releases, more support. But for somebody who's looking for a new feature today and isn't getting it or finding it slow, those people are going to say that they probably want to get features faster. And then on the other side of the equation is our community. I think the community is feeling that same balance too. Like they want to be able to get things faster and not have to support things forever. So it's a tight balance.
Like I mean, I think at this point, I don't feel like we need feedback from the general user base on those two alternatives if we get a feedback. The feedback I care about is test infra, the release team, and the sort of collective SIG leadership. Because the people who it really affects are the people who need to support our release infrastructure, who it obviously affects from a cost perspective, the people who are running the releases, and then the other people it affects are the people who are trying to get features in. And I think that, I mean, first, I don't think that our user base, I don't think the user base would be likely to have a clear opinion on 3 months versus 4 months. And I don't see if they had an opinion that it actually matters. I mean, we're not going to lose large numbers of users because we choose one thing or the other.
Yeah, oftentimes when there's a discussion where like it's not clear what the outcome of this discussion is going to be, like what Tim is asking here is fundamentally changing the CAP. And we have two proposals that are equally like good. We don't have an argument which one is better. It makes sense to me to ask the public, and if the public responds with a few thousand of comments, votes, it just the project may just go one direction. I mean that is my opinion, I guess.
It depends on who responds to it though, and within our existing survey data, we have people saying like they're happily using releases that are well out of support. So the data seems to say that the community doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, I would expect, based on our previous survey data, I would expect a slight tendency towards an approval of less frequent releases. Because if you look at that curve of which version people are using in production, you see that curve peaks like 2 releases ago. So, clearly people who are using releases that are 2-3 releases old in production would be happy to have us have less frequent releases. They might even be happy if we went to semi-annual releases. The main, like I said, the main concerns there are, there's two potential costs. One is, do less frequent releases make the release process notably harder, right? Because less frequent releases means bigger releases for some definition of bigger. And since I have ample experience with the endpoint of this with a project doing annual releases, I will tell you that that cost is substantial and notable. For projects that do annual releases, the code freeze phase can last up to 2 months, which is pretty painful for all of the maintainers while it's going on. The other, and obviously we wouldn't get there with 4-month releases, but how much longer would code freeze need to be, et cetera. So it's going to affect the release people. And then second, for people who are writing features, does effectively possibly needing to wait an extra 2 months if they miss the boat, how bad is that from their perspective? Because like right now with quarterly releases, if your feature doesn't make it in this quarter, then you can probably get it in the next release, and therefore you can probably get it in the next release, and therefore you're only waiting, say about a little over 3 months, 4 months for your release. Whereas if your stuff gets bumped out at code freeze in a 4-month release, and you're having to wait until the next release, then you're waiting 5 months. Doesn't seem like it should sink anybody's boat, but anyway, that would be a separate cap.
On that
It would
front,
be here's the alternative cap as we do this.
I would say I've become increasingly worried about the type of stuff you just articulated over the last year. I've seen an increase in proposals of cherry picks to patch branches which feel feature-like and which are, they're partly related to the fact that we don't have the split out monolith entirely yet, but
Yeah.
where a particular cloud provider is trying to get a feature into a particular release so that they can get it out to their customers. And they're even trying to do that in patch releases much, but then also in the current pending release, seeing a little bit more things that almost feel like enhancement proposals that are graduating early or being pushed forward to get them somewhere. And a vague sense behind that a vendor is looking to get something declared as GA so that they can convince their customers to use it. And seeing that explicitly in comments, like, we need to have this GA because nobody will use it if it's not GA. And that's the opposite of how we want to work as an open source project, I would assert, that we should be merging things that are ready and demonstrably viable, high quality, versus vendors wanting them in.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, so if we're going to talk about this as an alternative, I think it is an entire separate cap that will also require discussion, because for that matter, we have a stability working group. And I would say, hey, for the reasons you just mentioned, the stability working group needs to weigh in on any change to release cadence. Does this make their job easier or harder? So, and there would be a whole set of follow-on changes, right? If our releases were less frequent, we would need to change our deprecation policy, and, a whole bunch of other things. It would actually probably, or if we didn't change the deprecation policy, it would effectively mean that deprecated features would still exist for a longer calendar time.
Which changes how you do upgrades and impacts a cluster lifecycle. Like each push or pull on this, it's a giant rubber bear. You push in one spot, the other pops out.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. It looks like an easy trade-off, and it's the easier route from the test info perspective, but it's not easier in regard to anything else. The only reason why I still play around with the idea is there are ways that it would make the actual release cycle a little bit easier. because right now with a 3-month release cycle, the release team keeps running into timing issues around both KubeCons and international holidays. And having a 4-month release cycle would make it easier to dodge those kinds of things. But that said, we haven't had a late release in our last 3 releases have all gone out on time. So even
Yeah, the
though it's
only
annoying
variation
from a
has
calendar
been,
perspective, it's obviously not. Yeah, and the last one that was late, it was 2 days late.
yeah, it's
It
only
wasn't
been
like
a
it
day
was.
or two and little glitches generally. It's not
Yeah,
been like, oh, major feature issue type of
right.
thing. It's like a scalability issue that took
Yeah,
6 weeks to debug. Pushing
yeah,
something out only 2 days is actually pretty amazing.
yeah. So the I mean, there's ways that I would see it would make the release cycle a little bit easier, but is that a priority? Because the release cycle seems to be working pretty well right now. It's not an area of huge pain for the project anymore, as far as I can tell. So,
Yeah, I think other people are going to also ask these questions. So maybe we should draw a comparison table between the two methods and just cover this so that people are happy that we have an argument.
We're in the classic kept space of how much detail do you describe and all of the variations considered so that you're not constantly relitigating everything, or can you link off to existing artifacts? We may need to add some more detail on this.
okay. Yeah, well, I think we can throw up a Google Doc or something that says, hey, here's a comparison table of the costs and problems associated with each KEP. Or each approach, and why we chose this other approach.
Yeah, because tips intelligence our voice, if you get some of the original lead maintainers of the project, like Tim Hawking, Brian Grant, and the others, and if none of them agree with the KEP as this change, and everybody likes the other approach, it is going to be better for them to see the comparison and say like, hey, this is actually better than 3 months.
Yeah, at KubeCon in San Diego, fall of 2019 for the recording. Brian Grant was in the Contrib Summit session, and I would summarize as being supportive of what we're proposing here. I see that late last week, Tim Hawken marked himself on the KEP as intending to review, so we'll see what feedback we get there.
Yeah, so one thing, and we'll go ahead and push ahead with this online. One thing that I'm considering a possibility is we won't actually resolve this until the Amsterdam Contributor Summit. We may need to get people in a room for this.
Yep, that's why. So that's why we propose that to see, and we need to proactively be driving conversations in the meantime, so that we can have narrowed to some final discussion decision points, hopefully at that face-to-face. But yeah, that's kind of the thinking there.
Yeah, because we'll need to resolve it then, or we'll need to put off the target release. Like if we don't have a decision by Amsterdam, we'd need to put off the target release.
I see the target release is completely up in the air realistically at this point, but it's good to have a target, but
so okay, well, I will write up the stuff about testing. Somebody else want to start the 4-month alternative comparison table?
I can try and do that,
in terms of advantages and disadvantages of each approach.
The benefits of the public vote is that even if these lead maintainers approach you and say, hey, I don't like your KEP, I want the other option. If the community of thousands of people have voted, even they are going to agree with this vote, whatever it is. But yeah, I understand that it's not desired.
Yeah, well, I would say we don't have the ability to get thousands of people to respond to a survey. Like, we pulled out all of the stops to push our last survey, which admittedly was relatively long, and for that reason it limited who felt it out. But our last survey, we got it rebroadcast by like multiple key people in Kubernetes and by the CNCF, and we got 600 people who even started the survey.
And
I think the idea that we could get thousands to any kind of survey is optimistic.
Yeah.
And even like the steering committee doesn't get that many votes, and that's like one of the most visible things.
Well, it's limited who can vote on the steering committee.
Yeah, but still, there's thousands of. How many org members do we have now? Isn't it that big?
Yeah. The and like I said, from my perspective, I care about, I care about how contributors feel about the two alternatives. My caring for how the public feels. My hierarchy of who I care about is contributors number one, then vendors say number two, because the vendors are going to have feedback about what they would prefer that we do. Pretty sure I know what OpenShift's feedback would be. But for other vendors, not necessarily. There are other vendors that track upstream Kubernetes more closely and might appreciate the more rapid releases. And then maybe, the sort of general user base after that. So
I think the contributor, like we definitely, we started with trying to understand the end user and the vendor set to see what, is there actually a gap there? Are we as a community under delivering versus desired? So I think we started with their perspective with intention, and we're really off into a space where we're trying to figure out, well, with some things discussed and some desires there as a concrete gap, what as a community are we capable of delivering? And there it really gets into, even beyond the 1,000 or so people in the org, I think the SIG leads, because they understand what the specific costs are within their domain and their ability to organize people around doing the work. And if it's not viable, even if there is a desire from the end user base, it's not something as a community we would be able to tackle. We'd have to leave it to vendors to provide that differentiated support.
So we have a bunch of stuff to do on the CAP now. So you had some other stuff for this meeting?
The other thing was just to talk about the survey. So we were discussing not doing a survey, and I just wanted to reiterate that we decided not to do a specific survey ourselves, the production readiness one. So again, to just remind people to put some shout outs out there on that, try and get more people to respond.
Oh, okay.
I think last year's workgroup LTS survey had really high response rate because people were saying, hey, we're trying to get your feedback. We want to get feedback. So
okay, is the production ready one open now?
It is open now, yeah.
Okay. So there's a publicity point. What's this? Has anyone posted it to Kubernetes Dev? I don't remember even seeing that.
Good question.
I saw it.
I should think that's where I saw it.
Because I roll these sorts of things into LWKD, and I don't remember seeing it in any feed that it was live.
It's John Belmeric, Kubernetes production readiness help by filling our quick survey. There's an email. Did you see that Tim Hawking responded to the KIP?
Oh, there we go. Okay, why did I not?
Lunar, when did he respond?
Tim Hawking responded 4 minutes ago to the KIP.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say something about the survey we're doing for sequence lifecycle. If you think that we can inject some LTS related questions in there, I guess we have to formulate them probably during a call here. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but like last year we had a generic LTS question, like, do you want LTS in Kubernetes in the KubeADM survey? But it's a silly question. If you think we can formulate something better, we can have something like that in our survey.
Right. The only thing I would think of to throw into your survey, and this would be a SIG cluster lifecycle question as well, would be, you know, would it benefit you if the Kubernetes project had less frequent releases, for example, 3 times per year?
Okay, I'm going to add this to the survey
Yeah.
and see what the others think as well.
You know, with a yes, no, don't care. Because I think
Sure.
I think you'll get a lot of don't cares in response to that.
Yeah, possibly.
The
Tim Hawkins is saying that his first comment, he's saying that, hey, what happens if we do the same survey next year and we get different results?
And in particular, people preferring to have longer support. So before we had 9+3-ish, and people weren't happy with that. As we extended to 12+3, are people still like, oh, give me a little more? Could we have 15+3? And there's no reason to think that that won't happen.
Yeah, and that's it's already in the KEP as risks.
Yeah,
we've already put that in the KEP as risks, because that, yes, that very well could happen. You know, right now we're making the assumption that we're getting this 11-month problem because a lot of people are on sort of annual upgrade cycles, but that could be wrong.
We did hear that from some, that they have business processes that are around the calendar. And we know, like, from our own experiences, that that is something that happens, that is real. Whether it's the primary factor, it is hard to say. If we shifted from a 9+3 to a 6+2, and we shortened our support, either people would start upgrading faster or not.
Right.
If that is the main motivator. I don't see them upgrading faster in just my experience, what I've seen in my time in the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I would actually go as far as to say that if we were to fulfill our KEP and have, you know, roughly 13, 14 months of support, et cetera, a certain number of users will actually use that as an excuse to upgrade less frequently. The question is, how many? Right? I mean, I guarantee you that there are users out there that their process is, oh my God, the Kubernetes version that we're using is EOL. I better talk to my boss about upgrading. And those people will backslide to whatever our window of support is. The question is, you know, out of the 25 to 30% of our users who are on currently in the 11-month window, what portion that is. We're assuming that that's a minority, but we won't actually know until we do something. We're also up against another, you know, sort of fact that makes things a little bit unpredictable, which is that in the last year and a half, Kubernetes has gotten substantially more usable in production. And therefore, a lot of people's what is your production version is based on what was the first version you could use in production, rather than anything based on our release cycles. You know, again, speaking from experience with a very long-lived project, you know, there's still stuff out there in the wild using Postgres 7.4, which was released in 2004, I believe. And the reason is that 7.4 was the first version that could be run 24/7 without ever needing to shut it down for maintenance. And so people got on that version and then they never upgraded again. You know, and as the Kubernetes project gets further and further into the we are production quality, we're going to see those sorts of things, right? You know, this is the first version here. This matches the first version of OpenShift that was production worthy. This matches the first release of VMware's on-prem Kubernetes. And we'll see these sort of benchmark versions that never get upgraded. And right now, that's going to be kind of lost in our data because really we're looking at maybe about 2 years of production worthiness. And it's not possible for us to tell the difference between that and people's frequency of upgrading.
Is it really not possible to map this between the two questions?
We would need people to be willing to fill out a survey. We'd honestly need to do a follow-up survey that involved doing interviews with actual users. You get to a point where you can't really answer questions by multiple guests without leaving things out. So the way this is generally dealt with, if you're, say, an industry analyst, is you schedule meetings with like CIOs at users and organizations and do an interview with them and do a whole narrative interview. I mean, that's the kind of data that the analysts get paid for. And frankly, before we started doing that as a project, I would say, hey, can we get one of our sponsoring companies to pay an analyst to do it instead? They're already good at this.
And that is a possibility. So we'd opened a ticket with the CNCF and they were open to paying somebody. Paris found somebody that either from Google or that Google uses who, when funded, can do some detailed work in that direction. But it's pretty pricey, it seemed like.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah,
we
it's
need
a
to
lot
have
of somebody's time.
Yeah, we need to have a very concrete thing that we're looking for, so that like we're handing a contractor a spec to say, find this thing out for me, and we don't quite have that.
The so the and also to a certain extent, I think that only matters to the extent that if we actually believed that it was possible that out of that 28% of our users who are slightly EOL, that are slightly expired, if we believed that it was possible that a substantial portion, say half of those 28%, were people who were actually on benchmark versions and that it was not based on an upgrade cycle at all. And I just don't see that happening. Like I don't feel like getting that answer is sufficiently probable to make it worth the cost of pursuing it. Now, doing something more informal, because the CNCF does have an end user forum, and we could do something more informal and ask questions about that, and then pursue it if we're getting a lot of sort of affirmative answers, a lot of answers saying, oh, no, the reason why I'm on version X is because that's what vendor Y supports. Although then the question is, then you have to talk to vendor Y and find out why they're supporting a particular version. Because one of the things to keep in mind is it's not just the end user's release cycles we care about. It's the supporting vendors, and by vendor, I'm not only talking about Kubernetes vendors, I'm talking about vendors of things that plug into Kubernetes. That's going to be affected by this. It's actually possibly more important.
I really like the format of a podcast where you, like, I don't know, every 2 weeks you invite somebody who is consuming Kubernetes in production. You do an interview for 30 minutes with them, and then gather feedback this way, maybe.
You got to get the eyeballs there. You could argue that SIG Arch is that podcast. Their meetings are on YouTube. How many people attend?
Do they interview end users every meeting?
Well, they're not interviewing end users, but people are showing up as representatives of and talking about what global changes we should do for the project. whether they're arguing maybe primarily from their employer perspective or from
Yeah.
the customers of their employers. We have a funnel of representation.
Yeah. I mean, we did have, okay, wait, actually, before I go, we're at like 10 o'clock. Was there something else we needed to address during this meeting?
That was everything on the agenda.
Okay. Because we did have the end user thing at the contributor summit, which was very poorly attended, although there were extenuating circumstances around that. The biggest of which being that somebody moved the room at the last minute. But I don't. Well, I'd have to look up the notes for that. I don't recall release cadences really being a thing that, this group of 5 end users was particularly concerned about, like in any direction. It just wasn't one of the things that they brought up as an issue. Like, as opposed to, for example, bringing up the fact that our release notes were indecipherable to them, which was a major issue, and we've made changes to try to address that. So the that particular interview is actually part of my reason why I think if we brought up questions of 4 months versus 3 months, et cetera, to the actual end users, we would not get any determinative answer. I think we'd say some that said it was good, some that said it was bad, and a whole lot that said don't care.
That's the crux, I think, and that goes to Tim Hawkins' comment. Like we have a multimodal distribution. A lot of people are don't cares, and there's not a completely definitive answer within data here. There's patterns and a spectrum of possibilities.
Yeah. Anyway, we can do the comparison of 3 months, of in supporting an additional release versus slowing down our releases to 4 months without actually having that information.
Yeah. Well, we're over time. We should go ahead
Yep.
and call it. And we each have an action item. We're just going to add a little something to the survey. Josh is going to add a doc section. I'm going to see about making a
more testing
comparison
stuff.
table. Yeah, and testing. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.